Hi guys, I'm here today to do part 2 of my April wrap-up. So I already did part 1. It was the 12 books that I read for the Owls Magical Readathon. I will link that below in case you missed that. So I read 12 books for that, completed all 12 prompts. So in this video I'm going to talk about the other books I read during the month of April, which was 11. So in total I read 23 books during April, which is not quite as many as I read in March, but still a really good reading month. I do not expect to maintain these numbers throughout the year, but I'm enjoying it while it lasts. So yeah, let's talk about those 11 books. So towards the beginning of the month, I finished a few things. The first was Calamity by Brandon Sanderson. This is the third book in the Reckoners trilogy. I also read Firefight, which is the second book, but I talked about that in my other wrap-up. And this, yeah, like I said, just wraps up the trilogy. This is a sci-fi, YA sci-fi trilogy that follows a group of people called the Reckoners who are battling epics, who are people with supernatural abilities. So they're kind of like supervillains. These are a lot of fun. They're quick to read. There's a lot of humor in them. But yeah, just a good, quick adventure story if you're interested in that, or if you're maybe intimidated by Brandon Sanderson's fantasy. This is a great place to start. I was also working on finishing up the Little House series by Laura Ingalls Wilder, so I read These Happy Golden Years. I also read the first 4 years, which again was in my other wrap-up. But this is the second to last book in the series, and it follows Laura as she is teaching, she is courting, and yeah, just kind of those teen years. And it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed the relationships that are built in here and just those kind of first experiences of, you know, being young and everything is new and fresh and exciting. And yeah, this is one of my favorite in the series, I think, for sure. But so I did complete my reread of the series, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. I'm glad to have reread it. Then there was an event sometime during the month, I don't even remember when, but there was a wine and cheese reading social hosted by Rainy Day Reads and Elaine Howland. And so you were supposed to read something food-themed. So I picked up All Four Stars by Tara Derman. This was a book I had pulled out of the library for middle grade March and just never gotten to. So I just sat and read it that Saturday. And this follows a little girl whose name is Gladys. Gladys is a foodie. She likes to eat good food. She likes to cook. She likes to experiment. But her parents don't cook, and they don't approve of her cooking. And so that creates all kinds of drama. So she ends up entering this, they do an essay competition at school about what you want to be when you grow up, type thing, like your dream. And somehow there's a mistake, and her essay gets picked up by the newspaper, the food critic section, instead of the essay area where it's supposed to go, or the competition thing. So she ends up being having to write food reviews for the newspaper, and she has to do all this behind her parents' back. So whereas this sounds really cute, and there were cute aspects to it, and the writing is very readable and quick to get through, I didn't like the overall plot. I didn't like Gladys. I didn't like that basically the whole book she's going behind her parents' back, she's being dishonest, and in some cases downright disobedient, and is getting away with it. And her parents, they're a little bit clueless, but not to an extreme. Like, we're not talking like Roald Dahl horrible adults here. They're just parents that are busy and distracted. And I just don't like the way that they are presented and that the relationship is presented. That her parents are completely unrealistic to deny her the opportunity to do these things. But the whole reason she's not allowed to cook is because she accidentally lit the kitchen on fire, which, to me, not being allowed to cook without adult supervision when you've lit the kitchen on fire, that seems like a reasonable response to me. Like, that seems like a mature adult making a reasonable response to lighting their house on fire. But it's just kind of presented as way unrealistic, and they're preventing her from doing what she dreams of doing, and so she spends the whole book kind of going behind their back and being deceptive, and gets away with it, and gets kind of praised for it in the end. And I have a problem with that. So, whereas yes, I think you should follow your dreams, When you're 11, I think you should obey your parents. So, it was fine, but I wasn't really a fan. All right, towards the end of the month, we had Dewey's 24-hour readathon, which is my favorite readathon, and I definitely participated in that. And I read 5 books, well, 4.5 books, but I finished that 5th one, so we're counting it. So anyway, I read 5 books over the course of that weekend, so we're going to talk about those. The first was Babe the Gallant Pig by Dick King Smith. This is, of course, the book that the movie Babe is based off of. Follows a pig who becomes a sheep pig instead of a sheepdog. He's a sheep pig. And it's very cute. It's exactly what you'd expect. If you've seen the movie, it's exactly what you would expect it to be. It's sweet and it's charming. And the movie, I think, is a really good representation of the book. It just makes everything about it more charming. This is a very short, it's just over 100 pages. There's nothing particularly memorable about it. I enjoyed it. I probably wouldn't pick it up again. I'd probably go for the movie instead, which is rare for me. Then I read Dry by Neil and Jared Shusterman. This is a dystopian, kind of an apocalyptic novel about, it's set in Southern California, and it's what happens when there's a drought and the taps get turned off. So there's no water in California for the period of a week. I did not particularly enjoy this. Okay, that's not true. I did enjoy reading it, but more because I found it funny in ways that I don't think it's supposed to be funny. I don't think it's a particularly good book, although I've heard really good reviews of it. For me, it just seemed silly, and especially with how our world has changed in the last 2 months, reading this now seems ridiculous to me and totally unrealistic. So it follows this group of teenagers who are basically trying to get to a safe house, a shelter that one of their parents had set up. And just, all their adventures of trying to get out of the town and trying to get water. And in some ways, I think people are presented very realistically and that they become not very nice very quickly and are becoming violent and aggressive with their neighbors and just doing whatever they need to do to get water, including prostituting themselves. And I don't know, I just didn't, again, I found it funny, but not in a good way. And then at the end of the book, so this whole water shutoff lasts for a week. So this book takes place over the course of a week. And then at the end of that time, the water gets turned back on and everything goes back to normal. So there's a little epilogue that takes place 3 weeks after the water was turned off. So the water's off for a week, and then 2 weeks after that is when the epilogue takes place. And everything's back to normal, and people are back at their jobs, and everyone's happy. And, the world's all cleaned up. The world. Southern California. Like, in essence, their world hasn't changed in the course of that 3 weeks. Everything is just back to normal. And I found that so ridiculous. And just, I don't know. Again, it was entertaining to read, but it's not something that I will read again or keep on my shelves. After that, I picked up a reread, The Case of the Left-Handed Lady by Nancy Springer. This is part of the Enola Holmes series, which I've been talking about quite a bit lately. This is book 2, and this one follows Enola as she helps a young, kind of a society girl who has disappeared. This is one of my favorites in the series, I think. I really, really enjoy this one, and just kind of the way it talks about kind of just different aspects of Victorian society and between the higher class and the lower classes. And I thought it was really interesting. It was exactly what I needed during the 24-hour readathon, just something familiar that I knew I would enjoy. After that, I read Sold by Patricia McCormick. This one I had actually started before the readathon, but finished it up during the readathon. This is told in verse, and it deals with human trafficking. So it follows a Nepali girl, Lakshmi, who is taken from her community. She's sold and is told that she's going to go be a maid in the big city and earn money for her family, which is, of course, not what happens. And it's really beautiful. It's a hard read. Human trafficking and sex slavery in general definitely needs more attention than it gets. And so I think this book did a really good job of kind of presenting that and what it looks like from the inside, or what it can look like from the inside, and what it looks like for people that get involved with it. It often looks innocent. So I thought I did a really good job with that. In general, I just wanted more. I'm not a huge fan of books written in verse because I never seem to get enough from them. I always want more. So whereas I do think this is pretty well done, I wanted more, and I wanted more information and more background and more characters, and yeah, I just wanted more. This is fictional, but it is based on a true story. So I do recommend it. I do think it's really good to read things like this. And it's definitely something that I think you should be aware of that's going on in the world. The last book I picked up during the readathon, and this one I read about half during the readathon and then finished it later that Sunday. This is The Passengers by John Mars. This is a thriller that follows a group of people. This is set in a future society where all the cars are self-driving. And so a terrorist basically comes in and hacks the system and is sending 8 people to their death. Basically, the cars are all going to collide, and he sets it up in a way that people get to vote on who lives and who dies. So it basically takes over social media, and people are, voting on who they like, who they don't like, who lives. And it's a really interesting just kind of perspective on how we value human life, as well as the impact of social media. That's what I love about John Mars' books. This is only the second one I've read, but I like that he takes things and kind of twists them in a way that makes you think about them differently. It was really interesting, just presented you with kind of really interesting things to think through, and what do you do in this situation? And well, you say, well, I can't vote for someone to die. Well, if you don't vote for someone to die, they all die, which is better, which is worse. And yeah, it was really interesting. I don't think I liked it quite as much as the one, which was the other one I'd read by John Mars, but still really good, really interesting read. All right, and then at the end of the month, I had 3 books that I finished up. First was The Faceless Old Woman Who Secretly Lives in Your Home by Joseph Fink and Jeffrey Cranor. This one I actually started during the readathon, but only read like the first 20 pages. This is a Welcome to Night Vale novel. Welcome to Night Vale is a podcast. It's an odd podcast. Think like Twin Peaks or Eureka, if you've seen that show. It's a set in a kind of isolated community where things are weird and abnormal. I really, really enjoy it, but it is very odd. So just be aware going into it that it's odd. And I really enjoyed the first 2 novels that they wrote. This one I did not enjoy as much, mostly because it's not set in Night Vale, so it's not what I was expecting. This is more historical fiction that's a backstory to the Faceless Old Woman, who is a recurring character in Night Vale. And this is her backstory, so it's basically historical fiction. It deals with pirates, which sounds really interesting, but was actually pretty boring. And it was just not what I was expecting. The parts I liked the most were the parts that did take place in Night Vale. Everything else just seemed kind of pointless. I don't know. I just thought it was pretty boring. So, meh. If you're really into Night Vale, probably read it, but otherwise I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. I read The Language of Bees by Laurie R. King. This is part of the Mary Russell series. Mystery series, and this is a reread for me. I'm rereading series so I can catch up on the newer ones, which I haven't read. But this one is still a reread. This is the 8th or 9th book in the series, I think. And these are historical mysteries. It follows Mary Russell, who is the apprentice to a retired Sherlock Holmes. Obviously, I can't give you a lot of information about the plot of this one because it does take place later in the series, and spoilers. But it's a really fun series. I highly recommend you check it out. If you're into Sherlock Holmes, if you like historical mysteries, it's a great, great series. And then the last book I read this month was The Ghost Map by Stephen Johnson. This is nonfiction. It's about London's cholera epidemic back in the 1800s, 1854, which sounds really interesting and should be really interesting. It was not, unfortunately. There were parts of it that were really interesting. But I don't think Stephen Johnson did a super great job as the author. I think that was the problem. He focuses on things and then repeats himself a lot. So he gets kind of going on one little train of thought and then just like hits it again and again and again and again. And then you're like, yeah, I got it. Like, tell me about something else. So he either does that or he tells you about 100 things all at once and you can't take it all in or figure out how it's all related. There seems to be no middle ground, which in my mind is kind of what you need. It seems to either go one way or the other. And it was really hard to stay interested. I was either bored or overwhelmed, I think. And there didn't seem to be a very good balance in the way he was writing. And then the whole last chapter, it's not even a chapter, it's the epilogue, which is like 60 pages. He talks about urbanization. He goes off on this tangent about the solution to the world's problems is urbanization and everyone living in big cities, after he spent the whole book talking about how cholera was only a problem in the big cities. I don't know, and it was just all opinion and not fact-based, and just like it felt like he wrote the whole book so that he could spend 50 pages talking about urbanization and how terrorism and bioterrorism and all kinds of things that weren't related to cholera. And I don't know, I would say if you read this, because there are good things about it, and it is interesting in some ways, but I would skip the whole epilogue. It has nothing to do with the rest of the book. And yeah, I was just in general not super impressed with this book, although it's a super interesting topic. I don't think the author handled it particularly well. So that is it. The 11 books I read, 11 of the books I read, I guess I should say, in the month of April. Again, I'll link my other wrap-up below if you missed that one. Be sure and let me know down below if you've read any of these books, what your thoughts were, or tell me what your favorite book that you read in the month of April was. Thank you for watching.